The city had long ago learned to whisper his name instead of speaking it aloud, because power that deep did not need volume, it needed fear, and Alessandro De Luca ruled the underworld like a silent storm coiled behind glass towers and velvet curtains, a man whose decisions could erase businesses, families, or entire futures with a single nod. Yet on that winter evening, seated alone in the corner of the Grand Aurora restaurant, dressed not in his usual tailored dominance but in a simple charcoal coat, he was not the feared mafia boss the city trembled before, he was simply a son waiting for his mother. Maria De Luca arrived 10 minutes late, her steps careful, her coat old but immaculately clean, her silver hair pinned back with dignity that poverty could never steal, and though Alessandro owned half the city, he could never convince her to live in his mansion or accept his money beyond what she needed for groceries and church donations. She had raised him in a cramped apartment above a bakery, teaching him that respect was the only wealth that mattered, and she still believed her son ran import businesses, instead of empires of shadows. The restaurant glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble, a place where politicians laughed too loudly and businessmen shook hands too firmly, and as Maria made her way toward Alessandro's table, a group of intoxicated young elites near the center began to notice her worn coat and modest shoes. One of them, the son of a powerful judge who secretly owed Alessandro millions, smirked cruelly and whispered something that turned into laughter, sharp and slicing. Maria paused, unsure whether to move forward or retreat, when a waiter accidentally brushed past her and a glass of red wine spilled across her coat. The room fell into that dangerous silence where humiliation blooms, and instead of apologizing, the drunken young man stood, clapping mockingly, announcing loudly that perhaps the charity cases should dine elsewhere, because fine wine was wasted on cheap fabric. Alessandro saw everything. He felt the air shift. His men stationed discreetly throughout the restaurant stiffened, waiting for the smallest signal, a raised eyebrow, a clenched fist, and the city would wake tomorrow to news of disappearances. But Maria, trembling yet proud, tried to smile and insisted she was fine, her voice gentle, telling them accidents happen, that God forgives carelessness. The young man leaned closer and flicked a napkin at her stained coat, saying forgiveness was for equals. Alessandro's heartbeat slowed, not from calm but from the kind of fury that turns glaciers into avalanches. He could end the judge's career, burn the young man's inheritance, make an example so brutal it would echo for decades, but before he could rise, before his empire could unleash itself, a soft yet steady voice cut through the tension like sunlight through iron bars. "That's enough." It came from a young waitress standing near the bar, her uniform slightly oversized, her shoes clearly worn beyond their lifespan, her name tag reading Elena. She walked forward without hesitation, placing herself between Maria and the group of men, her hands trembling but her chin lifted. She apologized sincerely to Maria, removing her own apron to gently dab the stain, then turned to the young man and said, with quiet strength, that respect was not reserved for wealth, and that if anyone needed to leave, it was those who confused privilege with superiority. Gasps rippled through the room, managers rushed forward, whispering harshly to Elena about losing her job, about the influence of the customers she had just embarrassed, but she did not move. Alessandro watched in stunned silence, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, a reminder of a time before power hardened him, when he too stood up to bullies in alleyways to protect his mother. Maria looked at Elena as though seeing an angel in borrowed shoes, thanking her with moist eyes, while the young elite scoffed and demanded the manager fire the charity waitress immediately. The manager, pale and sweating, nodded nervously, ready to sacrifice Elena to protect the restaurant's reputation. And that was the moment Alessandro finally stood. The temperature of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as every eye turned toward him. The young men's laughter died instantly as recognition dawned, because even arrogance has limits when it meets true authority. Alessandro walked slowly toward his mother and Elena, his expression unreadable, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of finality. He draped his own expensive coat over Maria's shoulders, then looked at Elena not with dominance but with respect, asking her name, and when she answered softly, he turned to the manager and informed him that the Aurora restaurant had just been purchased in full, effective immediately. The color drained from faces. The judge's son tried to speak, to apologize, but Alessandro silenced him with a glance and said that humiliation was a debt, and debts in his world were always paid. Yet instead of demanding punishment, he did something no one expected. He announced that Elena was now the restaurant's manager, effective tonight, and that anyone who believed respect could be bought was welcome to test that theory elsewhere. Maria, unaware of the deeper storm, simply smiled at her son, proud that he had defended kindness rather than unleashed vengeance. The elites fled, their powers suddenly fragile, and Elena stood frozen, overwhelmed, tears threatening to fall not from fear but disbelief. Alessandro leaned closer and whispered to her that courage is rare, and rarer still when it costs something, and that tonight she had reminded him of who he once was. But as the night settled and Maria enjoyed her meal in peace, Alessandro knew something had shifted inside him, something dangerous not to others, but to himself. For the first time in years, he wondered whether power used without mercy had slowly stolen pieces of his soul, and whether a poor waitress had just begun a chain reaction no enemy ever could.